What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
Here we go. I don't know why we've had replays at the beginning and all the rest of it. All right, so where were we? Friday, September 29th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday, end of the week. Mike is in the control room ready to answer your phone calls. The lines are open, 800-313-9443. And a reminder that the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3 today with her unique perspective on the world. So let's get into the news here. Hillary Clinton is still out there traveling around trying to sell her book. I understand she's sold about 300,000 copies so far, which is not very good. Certainly for something that's being touted as a bestseller here. She's up in Canada doing her Blame Everybody But Me book tour. And out there about, political press obsessed with her emails, the unprecedented intervention of FBI Director James Comey, and all the rest of that. And again, if Hillary Clinton and her staff had been playing by the rules and obeying the laws and regulations, there wouldn't have been any issue about her emails in the press. There wouldn't have been any issues about James Comey needing to investigate. So it really does all come back to her, but she's out there still spreading the gospel of everybody's to blame except her. But she's got a new message out there saying democracy is under attack. And she thinks democracy is under attack because she lost that election last year, meaning that democracy means the liberals have to be in power. And she's out there telling the Canadians, you've got to be on guard about this. You can't let those gosh darn conservatives win any elections because if conservatives get voted in, it's the end of democracy. No, it isn't. It is democracy in action. But again, to the liberals, only liberals should be in power here. Now, over at the Washington Compost, they're actually admitting right now that, yes, the claim that Kushner used private email servers for some business-related emails is not to the same extent as Hillary Clinton's private email server. Kushner was not transmitting classified information over his private email accounts, and the only reason he was using the private email accounts is that's where people were sending him questions, rather than his official government email address. So he just hit reply and answer their questions. And it's business related, but it is not classified information. And that's the real difference. Hillary Clinton parked a lot of highly classified information, including special access compartmentalized, on her private email server, which had weaker security than Ashley Madison. Guccifer had come on out there and said that when he was inside her server, he saw at least 10 foreign IPs also logged in prowling around. And that is why Hillary's email server deserves much more attention than anything Kushner had done. But we're seeing the entire political establishment in Washington, D.C., they're out to protect Hillary Clinton, protect Loretta Lynch, protect James Comey, protect the narcocracy, and keep all the attention focused on why we should be slapping Donald Trump upside of the head. Now, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates, and apparently Judicial Watch is scoring quite a bit of a victory because a federal judge has agreed to review the redacted material from Hillary Clinton's emails during her time as Secretary of State. And Judge Kolar Kotali has also ordered the State Department to file an affidavit addressing why it should not have to search new Clinton emails recently recovered, which they're saying, we don't have the time, we don't have the staff, sorry Judicial Watch, it's none of your business anyway. Well, it is the business of the American people. Everything Hillary Clinton did as Secretary of State belongs to the American people because we paid her salary, we paid for that building. And the laws are they're supposed to be open records. So they're moving forward on this, and basically the court rejected arguments by Tillerson's State Department and its lawyers at the Sessions Justice Department. So the courts are slapping down the Department of Justice lawyers who are still out there trying to protect Hillary Clinton. Because if that unravels, if I'm correct about the espionage, and if the American people at large find out about how the entire Clinton political machine was launched with the CIA's gun and cocaine running operation out of Arkansas, that is a scandal that is not going to go away. That's a scandal the federal government could not survive and should not survive. We're living underneath a criminal government, a government that engages in crimes under domestic law and international law, whether it's drug smuggling, use of torture, violation of our Bill of Rights. So, moving on here, Mexico has had over 5,400 aftershocks after that big quake on September 7th. It's still rocking and rolling down there. I remember after the Northridge quake, which Claire and I went through, there was about 2 months there where we were getting these small tremors. It was very nerve-wracking that they were coming all day and night. Over in Puerto Rico, the Royal Caribbean Steamship Line has sent a cruise ship to help evacuate people from Puerto Rico. Very generous thing for them to do. They canceled their September 30th Adventure at the Seas trip. They're moving all the passengers who'd booked onto other trips, other tours, and they're turning the ship over to help victims of Hurricane Maria. Now, again, Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is a good example of why you should be a prepper. And now even the Department of Homeland Security is saying it's not crazy to be a prepper. You should have a prepper mentality. Aid is arriving at Puerto Rico at the docks. It's not getting to the people in the interior of Puerto Rico because the logistics train has been destroyed. The roads are ruined, bridges are down. There's a lack of airfields where they can go in with helicopters. And so a lot of the stuff is still staying on the docks. And people in the interior of the island, they've run out of water, they've run out of food. It's a serious, serious situation. Now, Oscar-winning actress Patricia Arquette is deeply involved in political activism. She was a huge Hillary Clinton supporter in 2016 and is out there screaming about Donald Trump. So Arquette decided to lean into the fray over Puerto Rico, and she tweeted a photo of an Air Force C-5 Galaxy transport plane and asking if they can be deployed to Puerto Rico. And she tweeted the request to Hillary Clinton. Now, there's a problem there. Because of the results of the 2016 election, and according to this little document known as the Constitution, Clinton is not in a position to be able to order the military to send a plane down there. However, President Trump can and has been mobilizing U.S. military assets to assist the hurricane-ravaged island. The issue with the C-5A Galaxy is it takes a lot of runway to put that plane down and take it back off again, even with JADO bottles. And much of Puerto Rico does not have those kind of airfields available locally. They're going to need to get some more helicopters down there, some of the big Chinooks. Now, getting on over to the war zone, ISIS has launched a major offensive trying to cut off the highway between Palmyra and Deir ez-Zor. They still haven't quite given up recapturing Deir ez-Zor. And so apparently yesterday, these various ISIS assault groups supported by battle tanks and technicals armed with heavy guns attacked Syrian government forces at a few points at the Palmyra Deir ez-Zor highway, the key government supply line to Deir ez-Zor city. They're trying to lay siege to it again by cutting off that supply route. So the battle is still going on over there. But at this point, it is looking like it's all over but the cleanup. And the conditions exist to bring the war to an end. Now, right now, Damascus has gone to the United Nations and asked the United Nations to stop the U.S.-led coalition war crimes and to expel them from Syria, because the U.S. does not have the permission of either the Syrian government or the United Nations to be in Syria. So Syria is going to the UN Security Council and saying, we need a resolution condemning this. And Damascus is saying these U.S.-led airstrikes, which we're told are supposed to be ISIS and Al-Qaeda, only aid ISIS and Al-Qaeda, while at the same time claiming endless civilian lives and destroying vital infrastructure in Syria. And, of course, we know if the Security Council tries to do anything about that, Nikki Haley will be out there with her little pom-poms and cheerleader outfit going, veto, 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 because that's her job. Now, apparently in Great Britain, Defense Secretary Michael Fallon made the comment that Britain has made a major contribution to crippling the Islamic State and Syria and Iraq. And the Russian Ministry of Defense came out with a rebuke saying that, in point of fact, there wasn't a major contribution by Great Britain, and it's not invaluable. It was pretty much worthless. And Great Britain is trying to grandstand that they're an important participant in what's going on, but Russia is saying, no, actually, they weren't at all. Now, it looks like somebody somewhere is still trying to find a way to reverse the situation in Syria and get back in there and sell the idea that Assad is cruel to his own people. They're not going to try another gas attack. That falls apart. So they've come up with a new one. And this came out of CBC up in Canada. And the story is, there's a former Syrian military forensic photographer who goes by the code name of Caesar. And he appears on the TV interview on the CBC wearing a blue hood. You can't see his face, you can't see his hands, you can't see his skin color. Supposedly he's now in hiding, fearing for the safety of himself and his family. So you can't talk to him, you can't ask him any questions. And he gave this interview to CBC's The Fifth Estate through a translator, as long as CBC keeps his identity hidden. And he's got a whole bunch of pictures, frankly, a lot of which look staged to me, to prove that Assad is still committing horrific acts of torture against his own citizenry. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. They're really laying it on thick here. Now, as you know, up in Afghanistan, the U.S. has all of a sudden started claiming that Russia and Iran are arming the Taliban. And by golly, that's our job, because back during Charlie Wilson's war, when it was the Soviets who'd gone into Afghanistan in response to U.S. regime change efforts, and the U.S. armed the Taliban to drive the Soviet Union out. So how dare Russia come on in and change up the game by arming the Taliban against us? You're not allowed to do that. It's against the rules that we just made up. But Russia has come on back and said, we're not actually sending any arms into Afghanistan. The U.S. is making strategic and tactical mistakes. They don't want to admit it. So as always, with everything else, we're going to blame Russia. We're not succeeding in Afghanistan. Hardly anybody ever does throughout history. But we'll blame Russia for the U.S. failure. Remember, the last military commander to successfully conquer all of Afghanistan and hold it was Alexander the Great, and he only kept it for 3 years. There's a reason Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. Now, at this point, we're starting to see Turkey sort of pull away from the West, probably an artifact of that botched coup d'etat against Erdogan, and the fact that the U.S. is still sheltering this supposed cleric who was the mastermind of the whole deal. And so Iran and Turkey are sort of going through this rapprochement with Russia's blessing. And this, of course, has serious implications for Israel and the United States in the region, because Turkey used to be an ally. Turkey used to be the handmaiden of both the U.S. and Israel when it came to Syria, and now Turkey's moving away. And we're seeing more and more countries that are pulling out of the Western coalition of they twisted our arms to get us in there. And they're starting to pivot over toward Russia, China, Iran. Now, over in Iran, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif is saying that if the United States withdraws the 2015 P5+1 nuclear deal, Iran will also opt for quitting the deal. Iran has made it very clear there will be no renegotiation because the renegotiation is entirely to the U.S. and Israel's advantage. They want to include the long-range missiles in the deal now. And regardless of what happens from this point forward, the way that Donald Trump has handled this Iran deal, saying, I want to renegotiate it to add in a bunch more missiles, or I'm going to cancel from it, either way, it is sending a message to other countries such as North Korea that you should not trust anything the U.S. government says. You should not take any of their promises at face value. We learned those lessons over and over again in Libya, in Syria, Iraq, and now Iran. We're going to take a phone call. Jerry in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Aloha. Hey, listen, I wanted to call yesterday because we blame everything on Russia, the elections, everything else like that. But did you hear anything about NASA and Russia was going to build a space station to observe the moon?
They're talking about a space station that's out basically following the orbit of the moon. Obviously, they can't get too close. They may be thinking with the idea of cleaning out one of the Lagrange points and anchoring the space station there where it would be stable. But Lagrange points tend to accumulate a lot of debris because they are the Lagrange points. So they're going to have to clean out what's already there.
Okay, but you did hear something about that, but yet we still blame them for everything, but yet we're going to go into business together and build a space station.
We have to be in business with the Russians. They're the only ones who know how to make rocket engines these days. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and let me just look at something here. There we are. Apparently, officials over in Austria are talking about eyeing some of Iran's development projects. And this is another indicator that the rest of the world has really had it with all these U.S. sanctions, especially when you consider that the U.S. sanctions have actually caused a lot more damage to the West than to the intended target, in this case, Iran or Russia. Now, over in Syria, following the Kurdish independence referendum, Syria is considering granting the Kurds greater autonomy. And this is actually a very attractive deal because if the Kurds agree, they'll have more autonomy. They'll still technically be part of Syria, but they'll have a lot more autonomy, and this will be guaranteed without having to go to war over it, versus trying to secede and triggering a war. So the Kurds may actually go for this. And if they do, of course, then that works against the interests of the United States and Israel that want an independent Kurdistan as a tool to break up Iraq and Syria and make them weaker. Now, apparently, a British analyst is out there saying that it is primarily the United States that is trying to get the Kurds to secede, to start a new upset. And what the United States has started to do is they're going around the world looking at, shall we say, organic domestic dissent, the color revolutions. And they're going on in and hijacking them as a tool for regime change while trying to make it look like this is what the people wanted. They did it up in Ukraine, in Kiev. We've seen them do it in a couple of other countries. And so in trying to hide their regime change activities, they're trying to embed themselves inside legitimate domestic dissent, and if necessary, kick that up. Now, the Kurds understand they're going to be under serious criticism and possible military action, but that's how much they want to be their own people. And again, this is their right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article coming out of Middle East Monitor saying that Kurdish independence will see the disintegration of Iraq, which is exactly what Israel has wanted, and why Israel supports the independent Kurdistan. Over at the United Nations, they have finally decided they've had it with Israel and its impunity for all of its various actions. Israel holds the world record for most resolutions passed against it by the United Nations. Israel is the only member of the United Nations that had conditions on its acceptance as a member, and Israel has never complied with either one of those conditions. But anytime the Security Council tries to do something about Israel, the U.S. can be counted on to veto, 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 veto. And so now the United Nations, UN officials are moving to hold Israel accountable for breaking international law, even though they're facing resistance from Israel and its allies, because after all, you know, Israel is God's chosen people, and they're above international law. How dare you hold them to the rules everybody else does, or some such logic as that. So after decades of Palestinian disposition, Israeli military occupation and apartheid, the United Nations has taken its first concrete, practical step to secure accountability for ongoing Israeli violations of the Palestinian human rights. And again, isn't it kind of an obvious double standard? Israel's all in favor of an independent Kurdistan, but when the Palestinians say, we want independence, no, of course not. You're sitting on land that should belong to us. So basically, the UN Human Rights Office is now sending letters to companies around the world saying that they're going to be added to the database of firms doing business with illegal Israeli settlements, and that will make them targets for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Israel has found more Nazis to wag at us. Oh, my goodness, they found 2 former SS Death Squad members. And one of them is 94-year-old Kurt Gostak, who, when interviewed, said, yes, he was part of a special SS unit in Einsatz Group C in Ukraine, but he worked in the motor pool, repairing vehicles. And the other one, 95, said that, yes, his name appears on an Einsatz Group and roster, but he really didn't do all that much. Israel's just really in a corner. They're running out of Nazis because every time they're going to do something really icky, they trot out the Nazis. Oh, look, we've got Nazis, Holocaust, Hitler. Everything that we do to the Palestinians or the Syrians or the Lebanese is justified because of the Holocaust. And that really is a bit of a reach because, as I understand it, the Lebanese had nothing to do with the Nazis, and neither did the Syrians, and neither did the Palestinians. And yes, I will concede that at one point there was a senior Muslim cleric who met Adolf Hitler as a meeting between heads of religion and heads of state. And all world leaders have to do that, whether they like the person and agree with them or not. So Israel tried to make a big deal out of that. But isn't it amazing how Israel will scream about what the Germans supposedly did before any of us were actually born as their reason why they're going to go into Lebanon or go into Palestine or steal the Palestinians' land in the West Bank or go into Syria and steal the oil underneath the Golan Heights. Oh, really? It was all Hitler. You know, we're not doing anything wrong. We're just responding to this terrible thing that Hitler did to us. So at some point they are going to run out of Nazis, and again they've run out of people who really took part in whatever it is that was supposed to happen. Have you noticed the last few of these court cases involved people who processed the mail? There were office clerks. Now they've got a guy who basically was rotating the tires on the cars. And they're out there saying, well, they were part of this horrible death machine. And that's like trying to charge the person who peeled the potatoes at the military headquarters for what happened at My Lai in Vietnam. It's really a bit of a stretch. But Israel needs to have Nazis to wag at us so that they can shield what they're about to do. Oh, you shouldn't have done that to Lebanon. Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust. Shouldn't have done that to Syria. Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust. What are you doing stealing Syria's oil under the Golan? Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust. You must be an anti-Semite, Jew-hating fanatic who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens twice. It's a repeating pattern. Every time they wag the Holocaust and Nazis, it's because they're getting ready to do something really icky. It's a guarantee. Now, there's a story that we're going to talk about North Korea here. Over in the Express in Great Britain, they're out there saying that if North Korea attacks us, Great Britain only has hours to prepare for World War III when North Korea flings nuclear bombs at us. And it's a real possibility. They're coming to get you. Now, remember when the Express were claiming that Great Britain would only have a 45 minutes warning if Saddam Hussein fired a missile with a weapon of mass destruction at them. This is more of the same thing. They're trying to get everybody riled up and scared to support another war of conquest. And that's what these all have been. The United States has not been attacked by any of these countries that we've gone on in and ruined. We know who the aggressor is. Now, here's an interesting story. We're starting to see efforts at destabilizing Russia, which is why Russia has now thrown a lot of the George Soros-linked non-governmental organizations out of the country. Because everybody now knows how the U.S. has been playing this game of destabilization leading to regime change. So apparently 130 mostly American Antifa activists went on over to Moscow and engaged in violent rioting, and basically said they organized the protest to protest Russian hacking and attacking civilians simply because they were Russian and therefore responsible for helping to elect Donald Trump. So Putin has thrown them all in prison for a long time. So remind me, you Antifa thugs for hire, you got what, $35 an hour? Great deal. Great deal. You made a couple of $100 and you're not going to get to spend it for several years. Putin's got the right idea. We should be doing the same things with Antifa in this country. They're clearly terroristic. They engage in violence. They're using violence and the threat of violence to try and coerce changes to our internal politics, and that, under the USA Patriot Act, is the definition of terror. Why aren't they being treated that way? Now, as you know, there's been a lot of talk that the U.S. government wants to ban Russia Today because Russia Today refuses to go along with the U.S. narrative. Russia Today dares to put another point of view out there, horror of horrors. And Russia is coming on back and saying that if the U.S. blocks Russia Today, it's going to get another tit-for-tat response. Russia will shut down CNN in Russia. The fact that the U.S. government wants to shut down Russia Today, or for that matter, anybody challenging the official story, shows how scared they are. They realize they have lost control of the minds of the American people, and they're in a panic, and they're just trying to figure some way that they can silence the independent media and the foreign press while not appearing to trample all over that First Amendment right to freedom of expression, right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. That's going to be a hard one to get around. Now, do you remember that video that came out a little while ago with Morgan Freeman saying that Russia's evil, Russia's bad, oh, it's horrible? Well, there's a new one. And this one stars Liam Neeson. And he's joining the anti-Russia chorus calling on potential whistleblowers to aid the probe into Donald Trump's campaign alleged ties to Moscow. They are really, really desperate to try and find a link. And again, it is so obvious that the machinery of the government is just terrified out of their minds to look at what Hillary's been doing, what Loretta Lynch was doing, what James Comey was doing, because it gets too close to that narcocracy which is at the center of the U.S. federal government. That is the most protected point. That government-sanctioned trade in illegal drugs being sold to our children on the streets of America. So they're trying to get Donald Trump, because if that wall of silence around him breaks and he gets wind of this, I have a hard time thinking he'd sit still for that. We know he's being controlled because the White House staff is blocking information to him. He's only getting the information that is going to lead him to decide to do what his advisors want him to do. White House Chief of Staff Kelly is absolutely blocking Dana Rohrabacher's attempt to get this information about exculpatory information regarding the hack of the DNC email servers. And Assange has it, and he says he wants to trade it for a pardon. Last Sunday, a reporter asked Trump about this potential deal. Trump had never even heard about it. He's being walled off from this information by his own staff. I think at some point there's going to be a crisis where Trump realizes the extent to which he's being lied to, and we're going to see a major, major house cleaning at the White House. I hope. We really need it. The way it's set up right now, the military-industrial complex, all these generals around the president are using him to steer us toward World War III. And we're going to lose it. And that's why we have to oppose it. We have to oppose it for humanitarian reasons as well. War is bad. War is mass murder wrapped in a pretty flag. But I don't think any of us want to get into a world war that we are likely to lose. When you go back and look at the historical photos of what the losing side looked like at the end of World War II, whether it was Germany or Japan. All right, let's see. We're going to take some phone calls here. Nathan from Northern California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. I just had a real quick question for you. About, I don't know, I think it's a week ago, Susan Rice's housekeeper was found dead in a lake outside of her home in Ithaca, Connecticut. And I've been on YouTube. You know, it's really a great place because, you know, you can see anything and everything, you know, that people are talking about. And there's only like 3 videos, a minute and a half long, about the murder, you know, of her housekeeper. It's like a total blackout. Have you heard anything about it?
Not really, but apparently it happened after she was interviewed by the FBI. Truth or Fiction is saying it's a fiction. And it looks like all these gatekeeper stories, our websites are saying that it's all a hoax. And,
really?
Well, that's what they're saying. But again, we know that some of these gatekeeper sites like Snopes are in fact propaganda operations to try and discredit independent inquiry into things. And so it's hard to know who to trust. But as you said, going on to YouTube, there's only 3 videos about it. So there does seem to be a lack of substantiation on this.
Well, there is no indication. They just said that they removed the body from the lake, and they didn't say how she died. Was it gunshot, stabbing, strangled, beaten? Nothing. But they said that they had to identify it, her through dental records because her fingertips had been cut off.
Well, again, I'm seeing all these reports online that it's a hoax story, and that the photo is actually a body of a woman named Lorenza Relano being fished from a pond in Boyle Heights, and is actually from 2014. So at this point, based on what little I've looked at during your phone call, I'm not seeing this as being substantiated, and it may be more. And again, you need to understand that they're trying to dump as much phony news on the independent media as they can to trip us up, make us look bad, make us look as unreliable as the corporate media. And boy, that's going to take a lot to do. All right, so Nathan, thank you very much. We're going to let you go and switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, hey, people need to not trust everything on YouTube. You got to do a lot more research and delve deep into multiple different, sites and this or that, because a lot of phony stuff going around, and it winds up making, people look stupid.
You're absolutely right. It's called poisoning the well or just simple jamming here. But one of the ways in which our educational system has failed the American people is many people in the younger generations don't have the necessary skills in science or even math to spot when they're being lied to. And that's why we have so many people walking around saying, oh, yes, they had holograms at the World Trade Towers and they had micronuke this. And, they're just repeating what they hear on TV because that's what modern education under Common Core teaches. What the TV says, you will echo. And they're not teaching people to think for themselves, to analyze critically what's going on. And we need to bring that back if we're going to regain our freedom. Because a dumbed-down population, they really are just livestock.
Yeah, that guy who called, I saw like an interview with the guy who was saying that, and a lot of other stuff, like they landed the planes at a secret base, unloaded, and then flew another plane out. No, they didn't, because that would take more time, and loose lips sink ships. They wouldn't do that. That's just a common sense type of thing. The planes were Wahhabis with Israel involved, elements of your government, just like look at the facts that everybody knows the United States is arming jihadis in the Middle East to use as a proxy army. So that's a fact because there's multiple sources and multiple things to back that up.
Yep.
Hey, Mike, I watched the interview between Putin. Well, not the interview, but like the press conference between Putin and Erdogan, and it seems like they're pretty close now.
Yes.
I mean, my best friend, Putin, the S-400 really shows how Russia seems to trust Turkey now. They just got the first deposit, and that system to give to Turkey, that's a game changer. People don't understand. This is a game changer weapon system.
Yes, it is.
The best anti-aircraft system in the world, Mike.
Well, I understand the S-500 is about to come online.
Which could be why he gave the S-400, we talked about this, the Russia keeps certain secrets with certain abilities, and they'll give the export version. But Turkey is definitely pivoting, Mike.
Yes.
And you can see that. And I think you can tell the U.S. is getting desperate because they got to yank Liam Neeson. I guess he's not doing Taken 4.
I guess not. He started thinking he was an action star, and that's when I stopped watching him. I mean, he is a fine actor, but he's now stereotyped himself as this big, tough, action hero, and we've got way too many of those right now.
I liked him in Darkman.
I liked him in the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, that whole series. And I liked him in, what was the one about the haunted hotel where they wanted to fake ghosts to lure travelers, and it turns out there were real ghosts there. and it had, I think Richard Harris was in it. And that was the first time I noticed Liam Neeson, because he had this incredibly hard scene to do, where he's alternating between reliving this horrible crime he committed hundreds of years ago and noticing that there's a very hot woman in the room with him. Anyway, enough of this chit-chat. We need to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're just now getting word that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tom Price, has offered his resignation to Donald Trump, and the president has accepted it. We are told the reason for the resignation is Tom Price tended to charter a lot of private planes for his travel, doing what he was supposed to do on the job. My sense of it is there may be more to the story than just that. But that's all the information that we have here right now. We're going to take a phone call. Derek in Jacksonville, Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir. I was just visiting the anti-media Facebook page, and they had a thing up there about the structures going up, and nobody really seems to know what they are, even the MTA up in New York.
Yes.
And it seems like they're being real shady about it. Seems like something maybe facial recognition, Homeland Security. Just wondering if you had any ideas on that.
Not really. I mean, I've seen some pictures of the towers, and they look more like some sort of radio scanning system. Like what they may be doing is issuing cards so that you just walk past these things and you're allowed into the MTA, to the trains and buses and everything. If you don't have a card, alarms will sound. It's sort of like those anti-shoplifting systems working in reverse. But at this point, I don't know. You are correct. The fact that nobody really seems to know what they are, and they've cost apparently quite a bit of money, is of concern. When we see all these devices going on up and they're costing a huge amount of money and nobody seems to know what they're supposed to do, that definitely rings a few alarm bells.
Gotcha. Also seems like possibly could be, how they could send out different frequencies like sound waves, like noise, high-pitched sounds, which, you never know what could be coming out of them.
Well, I mean,
I think it's shady.
What would the purpose of high-pitched, high-frequency sounds be? I mean, one very common
as a weapon, as like a deterrent, like for crowd control, deterrent. I believe the military has stuff like that.
Well, they have the sound machines. I forget the exact term for them. But high-frequency sounds, I mean, you encounter those all day, every day, because a lot of the intrusion alarm systems in stores and museums and so forth use ultrasonic sound. Certain sensitive people can hear it. I remember when I lived in Southern California, I couldn't spend too much time in the Huntington Hartford because I would get a headache because I could hear those alarms going off on the walls. So that isn't really, if the note's high enough, most people won't even perceive it here. But yes, they do have those very loud sound weapons. They're really not all that effective, though, because, you can stick your fingers in your ear and get away from it. And yes, the sound is ultra-low frequency that's supposed to physically shake you and make you ill. But why they would build those in permanently at the MTA gates, I'm really not entirely sure about that. If they're trying to protect the MTA, just plain old-fashioned barricades, that roll down and lock would be, I think, far more efficient. So we'll keep an eye on it, and it may just be somebody else's boondoggle there. Derek, we're going to let you go. We got to do station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Following up on the resignation of Tom Price, apparently just in the few months he's been in office, he went through more than $1 million for government and chartered private jets, and it was a big stink. Apparently the White House approved the use of military aircraft for Price's trips to Africa and Europe this spring and Asia in the summer at a cost of more than $500,000. And so, yeah, that doesn't really look good at all. Now, getting on back to some of the other news here, people need to really tally up how much of their taxes have gone to wars. And there's an article that came on out from chrisandmaryville.net where they're totaling up the numbers. And basically, as of Monday, next, the average American taxpayer will have paid nearly $7,500 to fund the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria since the 9/11 attacks. Mind you, this is just the cost of those wars. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. It's not including funding for Pentagon weapons development. It's not including funding for these other wars, like in Libya, Somalia. The price is actually quite a bit higher. But $7,500, we could get a newer car for that money. And I think I would prefer a newer car than all these wars all over the place. Now, getting into the economic news, there's concern that Florida's orange growers are going to take a long time to recover from Hurricane Irma. The story that I'm looking at is actually saying may never recover. Well, never's a long time. And I'm sure they'll get it back up to the current, the productivity they had before the storm. But apparently the state's orange growers are saying the damage from the storm is the worst they've ever seen in their lifetimes. And many of these affected groves of oranges and grapefruits were near to being harvested, and their destruction helped send the price of orange concentrate futures rocketing higher. So a lot of people scored big on the commodities market who saw that. Remember that movie Trading Places? Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd and Aaron Russo produced that, who was the guy who made From Freedom to Fascism. And that storyline focused on orange futures. Now, as you know, a lot of talk going on about Trump's new tax plan, and as we mentioned before, Wall Street's attitude right now is pretty much like there really isn't that much there. It's basically the level of taxes we're paying now, they've just changed a few things around. It's like how Trump Care wasn't really all that different from Obamacare, and they've dropped that until next year anyway. But Gary Cohn is out there saying that, in all honesty, he can't guarantee taxes are not going to go up for the middle class under this new tax plan. Because the middle class, they're always going to feel the bite of any tax plan because the rich have enough money to protect themselves from tax increases, and the poor and working class, they don't have any money anyway. So it always falls on the middle class. We're going to take a phone call. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day, Michael. A few things are on my mind, but I'll get to the Black Lives Matter and NFL in a minute. But yeah, Michael, I was just thinking, you're talking about the taxes and all that. The gas has gone off the roof now again because of the hurricanes and all that. Where is all this money going? And all this money we're sending overseas to all these countries like Israel and all, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's a drop in the bucket for our budget, but to me it adds up.
It does all add up because every penny that's sent to a foreign government is U.S. taxpayer money that's not spent on the U.S. taxpayer. We were reporting yesterday on just how much the U.S. government has spent on the dreamers and the illegal immigrants, and we're talking billions and billions. I'm starting to sound like Carl Sagan. Billions and billions of dollars spent on the illegals spread across the galaxy. And it's really, it is unfair to the American taxpayer because nobody is listening to us. Every election we send the same message: stop borrowing money to pay wars, stop giving so much money to foreign countries, and start spending it on our country right here. And that was the implied message behind Make America Great Again. Stop projecting all this money and wealth and power around the rest of the world, acting like the U.S. is the global police officer, and take a look at what's going on inside our country with, deteriorated rail system, cracked pavement roads everywhere. Some of those long-haul trucks are having to buy more tires than they need to because of all the holes and potholes in our nation's highways. FedEx has actually had to double their budget for tires. You walk down the middle.
Michael, go ahead.
I was going to say, you walk down the middle of your nearby town and you look at the deteriorated condition, the homeless, the hungry, the retail vacancies, you'll realize this country is being neglected by that government in Washington, D.C. in their haste to take your money and give it to foreign countries or give it to the liberal agenda or certainly to the war agenda.
Yeah, it's amazing, Michael. It really is. What you're saying, it's mind-boggling. But I got to tell you this, Michael, so you know this. I live in South Florida. We went through the hurricane just now, okay? And you go to the Home Depot, there'll be 20, 30 Mexicans, illegals, I don't know what they are. And there's millions of trees down in South Florida here. There's tree work, so much tree work, this alone in Dade County and Broward County. But I see all these illegals, and I'm figuring to myself, why are all these trees still piled up all over the place? It's just amazing to me. And you got all these illegals, and then I don't know if you know this, Michael, but Trump's letting all these Venezuelans come in here. They hate this country. They were with Chavez, and now they're with Maduro. Now all of a sudden, the communist classes are all trying to get into the Doral area, the Miami Springs area. It's unbelievable. And these people can't stand this government in this country, but they want to all come here because they want food, Michael. The same with the Mexicans. All these people are coming to the United States. They don't have the food to eat. I don't know if you saw the catastrophe that's happening in Bangladesh. Have you saw that disaster?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. And, yeah, the reality is after the Gulf oil disaster and after Fukushima, there isn't enough safe, healthy food to feed the current human population. And that's why in countries, including the United States of America, the government is now doing a nod and a wink to food processors to add more fillers. When you get, 100% all beef patty, well, beef no longer means come off of a cow. Beef now means this artificial construct that includes some cow, but it also includes things like sawdust and various other fillers to make it look like there's volume, but there's no nutritional value. Especially these countries that are victims of U.S. economic aggression, they're going to come here to try and get some free stuff, and they're not going to really like our country very much because...
well, Michael, it's all the white man's fault. It's always the white man's fault for all these people want to come, and they hate the white people so much, but yeah, they want to come here. And it's like a magnet for them, like the welfare, the Section 8 housing, all this. I see it. I live here in South Florida. I can tell you, you got people are getting Dade County government jobs, Michael, don't even speak English. Haitians, Cubans, they come in here to get these big federal government jobs, but how don't they get a job? They don't even speak the language. We got guys in a body shop. Elian's uncle works in a body shop here in South Florida. He don't even speak English. Making $80,000, $90,000 a year. You got Americans can't even find jobs, Michael.
Yeah.
So, it's just mind-blowing to me. And then what really bothers me, too, is, I don't know if have you heard the news about the NFL with this Derek Carr and Oakland Raiders?
Yeah, I heard about that.
Okay, you heard that. Now the NFL is actually admitting that the games are fixed. Because that guy to get killed.
No, it wasn't fixed. They threw the game because apparently the front line was so upset that he stood for the anthem that they just sort of held back and let him get sacked, let him get tackled. And because of that, they lost the game. And now the NFL is looking into it as an issue of they're not doing their best to win the game, which they're required to do under their contracts. And it's a big, big stink. And this whole thing has just spun totally out of control. And whatever they were trying to do, trying to make patriotism look like racism or honoring the flag look like bigotry, it has backflashed on them. And ticket sales are way down. People aren't tuning into the games anymore. They've really kind of wrecked their own little thing that they had going. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the show.
It's unbelievable. Like I said, the NFL stands for no fans left. That's what it should stand for.
Yeah,
no fans left.
That's a good idea. Good idea, because it's certainly headed that way.
Yes, yes. One more thing, Michael, and I'll let you go because I know you got other callers. What's on my mind, too, is about what's going on with Europe with Merkel. I see that Merkel actually did win, I guess, supposedly in Germany, but the other parties are rising up. What's it going to take when that country's totally gone with Muslims? I mean, this is like Constantinople. Pretty soon the whole country's going to be speaking Arabic.
Well, I'm sure Merkel, like Hillary, is betting that if they can get enough refugees or illegals or whatever in the country out of gratitude, they'll vote for the politicians who made it possible. And we did, in fact, have huge numbers, millions and millions of illegal immigrants who voted for Hillary Clinton last year. And that needs to be looked at. There's certainly far more credible evidence of Hillary Clinton trying to steal last year's election than there is about Russia. And yet the focus in the official world of Washington, D.C. and the corporate media is, we've got to get that Russia connection. We've got to get that Russia connection. It's okay for Hillary Clinton to try and steal the election because she's a liberal, she's a woman and all the rest. But gosh darn those Russians, we've got to find that proof that they hacked them. And by the way, more of the states that the Department of Homeland Security claimed showed evidence of foreign hacking, and the corporate media leapt to the conclusion it was Russia. They're now coming back and saying they don't see the evidence of any hacking at all. Or if they're finding evidence of hacking, they're saying it has to be local, has to be domestic, got nothing to do with Russia.
Michael, one more thing. Hillary Clinton, you brought her up. Let me ask you a question. How come there's never been an open mic on her when somebody would ask Hillary at an open mic, a book signing, hey, Hillary, why don't you let Danny Williams Clinton get some of Bill Clinton's inheritance instead of giving all the money to Chelsea? Why isn't some of that money going to Danny Williams Clinton, the black son of Bill Clinton? How come nobody ever on an open mic caught that, like on CNN, Fox News, say, hey, Hillary, why isn't Danny Williams Clinton entitled some of that money that Bill's got when he died?
Well, first of all, corporate media isn't covering the book signings, and that may be at the request of Hillary Clinton because she has been surprised by people coming on up and asking these questions, which she will not answer. Some people have gotten some of the responses on their cell phones, but there is no open mic in front of Hillary. She doesn't want one. And she doesn't answer the questions. She simply has her security people eject the person asking the improper question out of the building, usually at high velocity.
I say put him on Maury Povich show. Danny Williams and Bill Clinton, put him on Maury. You have multiple millions of people listening. Waiting for the results on the DNA test.
Considering that Danny Williams has kind of sort of faded from public view, they may have come to some kind of a settlement. We're going to give you so much money, and you're going to stop making noise about this in the media.
Right. Wow. Right. Well, you're right on, Michael.
All right.
That's right. You got it. Have a great day, Michael.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to do shout-out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. We're going to go right back to the phones and talk to Chuck in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I just want to point out one thing about this whole NFL debacle. I looked up the rules, NFL rules, and it is a game, and we're supposed to play by the rules, and there's strict code of conduct for the beginning of the game. And that seems to be, that's it. If we're playing, we're supposed to play by the rules. I mean, if we're not playing by the rules, if we're not properly, respectfully honoring the flag.
Well, again, I think the reason that it blew up in the NFL players' face is that most Americans viewed this as disrespecting the nation and its people rather than a specific issue. And I think that's why it blew up in their face. And again, this has opened up that whole scandal about how the U.S. government and the military use these sporting events to recruit for the military, to try and show the glory of the United States to the rest of the world. The exact same reason why they had the gladiatorial games in ancient Rome. You know, this is a sign of how great we are. So they miscalculated badly on this one. Americans want to feel good about the American flag. not as a symbol of the U.S. government, but as a symbol of the United States of America and the American people. And the American people do want the United States to be great again. That's why they voted overwhelmingly enough to overcome the election fraud for Donald Trump to be the president. And I think whoever thought they were going to use the NFL to convince us that patriotism represents bigotry, they miscalculated. Had to be a liberal. Conservatives don't goof that badly in figuring out public reaction.
Do you think it's possible that this might be a distraction from the Tennessee shooting and the fact that a Sudanese person shot up a white church?
Yeah.
As opposed to Dylan Roof?
Yeah, definitely.
Dylan Roof, you looked at it. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They didn't want to report on the identity of that shooter because it doesn't fit the narrative that all the violence is caused by whites against black people. And here we had a black person who apparently was very active on social media saying you're more likely to be killed by a white person than a black person. And then he goes and he shoots up this church full of white people. And he's a migrant, and he's from Sudan. And it doesn't fit the narrative. The other thing that they use this NFL nonsense to distract us from is we've gone back to bombing Libya.
Yeah.
Okay?
I'm afraid that's well, pro sports have always, since the Roman times, like you said, has been a distraction from politics. I think we're just seeing more of it. I mean, who cares? They broke the rules. There's a rule book. It's a game. End of story. End of discussion. That's all I got to say about that, Mike, other than wish you a happy day.
Well, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news here. Now, interestingly enough, as you know, the elections in Germany did not come out quite the way Angela Merkel hoped. Yes, her party is still the majority party in the German government. She gets to keep her job, or at least that's the expectation. But she's trying to form a coalition government between these now weakened traditional German parties and these new up-and-comers, especially the Alternative for Deutschland party. And one of the first concessions they've had to make is that Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble is stepping down. And he's now out as the German finance minister. And Merkel's apparently decided that Christian Lindner, head of the FDP, he wants that finance minister job. And along with former SDP head and current finance minister Sigmar Gabriel, is an outspoken advocate of normalization of relations with Russia. Now, when the U.S. launched their sanctions against Russia, it caused a lot of damage in Europe, and it was felt especially hard in Germany, where a lot of companies do business with Russia, and all of a sudden that was just cut off. Because we must honor the United States' wishes that we will now make stink face at Russia. We don't do business with them anymore. We scowl and frown at them as fiercely as we can. Same thing down in France. France had been selling a lot of their agricultural produce to Russia. All of a sudden, couldn't sell it, was rotting on the vine. So we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take a phone call from Scott in Dallas. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, I hadn't called in since John from Barbados passed away. God rest his soul.
I miss him so much.
I know. I mean, we really did like him down here in Texas. So, and it really sucks. But what I called in about was for public corruption and how to start cleaning up the swamp in your own backyard by holding public officials accountable. Now, I've been fighting public corruption, and, you know, we do this on ruleoflawradio.com. We help teach people about it. And I did a video yesterday because I had a judge that wouldn't let me speak in a motions hearing. Well, I filed a state case on him, and he's trying to get it moved over into federal court. But in his response, he called me a scofflaw. So in my response, I counterclaimed it. You can go on my YouTube channel, Snafu Radio on YouTube, or just Google counterclaim Judge Dwight. This is funny. In the first paragraph, I'll just read this it's real quick, but it says, defendant called plaintiff a scofflaw. I feel disparaged. He is going to hurt my feelings. At no time did I call him a petty, fogging shyster grubbing for filthy lucre. Neither did I assert that he cannot be the sharpest knife in the drawer as he is scrounging around in the municipalities rather than out there making the big bucks. With the court's indulgence, if counsel will just bend over, I'll gladly pull that wild hair out of his behind so we can go back to treating one another like mature and responsible adults. But then again, regardless of how many facts and law a pro se puts before the court, we never get no respect. Now, if you want to start cleaning up your own backyard and draining the swamp, because all these courts, so much of the money goes to the state, which so much goes to the federal government. So we can start choking them down and start making them where they're going to have to be held accountable for all this stuff. And this is what we do. And we're making some huge gains around here. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. I thought it was so funny. I just wished I was a fly on the wall to see what the judge's expression when he read that.
Well, and unfortunately, you may have crossed the line into a libel lawsuit by making that public. And again, judges can be really mean about this stuff, especially when they're aware that they themselves are often committing judicial malpractice, but they don't want to be called on it by anybody. The mechanisms that we used to have to try and make sure that judges were being fair and honest and unbiased, those mechanisms have eroded over time, and we're seeing all kinds of judicial malfeasance all across the country. The system is hopelessly, irretrievably corrupt, and I wish you a lot of luck. But again, right now our best solution is to hang back, not get involved, and just wait for the federal government to collapse the way the Soviet Union did, because I'm convinced that's what's coming.
Well, unfortunately, the way that they're going, we have to hold these people accountable. And if we don't start holding them accountable, it's just going to get even worse. And so that's the way we kind of feel about it around here. And we want these guys to follow the letter of the law. I mean, this guy wouldn't even, my whole suit was he wouldn't even let me speak in a motions hearing and told me to shut up, basically, which is illegal. And so once you call these guys out on it, they're going to have to start paying attention to all this stuff. So if he wanted to file any kind of suit against me, that means I get to ask for discovery. And that would not go very well for him, because it's just going to prove my case even more.
Yeah, but your case is going to be tried. Your case is going to be tried in front of another judge who, in all probability, is golfing buddies with this first guy. Supposedly, the judges are assigned to cases at random, so you can't go out and look for an honest, fair judge. You could be randomly assigned one who's even more corrupt than the judge you're trying to sue. And that's why a lot of these attempts to use the court system, to police the court system, come to no end. And now, I'm not telling you to quit. I'm wishing you a lot of luck. But I'm saying be ready for a lot of opposition. Scott, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, the reality is we can talk about tax cuts. We can talk about cuts in spending. The reality is the U.S. government is in a huge mess. Right now, they're even having trouble just making the interest payments on the national debt. It has been years since anybody even tried to pay down on the principal. That's how out of control it is. And the reality is that if they cut taxes and they don't cut all this military spending, it's just going to raise the debt even more. And one of the downsides that we have in our system of government is we have all these members of Congress who are only thinking about the next 2 or 6 or 4 or 8 years. And after that, it's going to be somebody else's problem. And so we have known about this issue of increasing government debt going back the last 100 years to the founding of the Federal Reserve. And every Congress that comes on in realizes there's a problem, and they just kick the can down the road. And they've kicked that can down the road so much it looks like an old, worn-out gum wrapper. And here is something that you need to understand. Our generation, the younger generation, who are expected to pay this huge, huge cost in accrued interest on this national debt, never had a chance to vote on whether they would live under a private central bank. They were not given that choice. It was rushed through by the founders of the Federal Reserve, through their good buddies in Congress, long before we were all born. And they knew it was going to lead to massive poverty because the Federal Reserve is hardly the first private central bank in history. There was another one called the Bank of England, and its predations on the early colonies were a major cause of the American Revolution. So right now, we are all being told we have to pay off this huge debt that none of us ever gave our permission for the government to incur. There was actually talk a few election cycles ago about a constitutional amendment that would say the government can borrow money, but it must be paid back by the end of the current administration. And, of course, that one went nowhere because every administration wants to borrow a bunch of money, share it with their cronies, buy the approval of the population, and then stick the debt onto the next person coming into the office. That's politics for you. So over in Chicago, where they're dealing with severe fiscal issues over there, they've got a $260 million budget gap. And because it's a liberal city, we can't cut spending. We need all these social programs. We need these programs for the dreamers and for the illegal immigrants. And we need all these special programs for all the special interest groups here. And so Mayor Rahm Emanuel is saying they're going to solve the budget problem with what he calls super ticket writers. This means the city is going to hire a crew of special police officers whose only job is to harass and fine residents for as many petty quality of life violations as possible. So we've reached an age where the government is plundering and pillaging the citizenry. We have returned to the age of Robin Hood, when Sir Guy of Gisborne's tax collectors would ride across Nottingham stealing chickens and pigs and farmers' daughters whenever they felt like it. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I was reading up on some of the changes that are proposed in your tax code, if it were. One of the things that kind of struck me was that since 1987, the United States tax code has tripled from around 24,000 pages to over 75, close to 76,000 pages.
Yes.
That's insane.
Well,
a lot of these tax lawyers, doesn't it?
Well, it's good for the business of the tax lawyers, and they don't want ordinary Americans to be able to wade through the tax code and understand it, because there are some embarrassing secrets being hidden in there. And anytime you're in the government and there's something you don't want the American people to know about, you just obfuscate the heck out of it. And that's why the tax code is as huge as it is. The other aspect is that most of that tax code represents an accumulation of decade after decade of special favors to donors to members of Congress, where they'll amend the tax code to give a special loophole or a benefit to these people over here, or that we're going to increase taxes on the competitors to our donors over there. And these things never get taken on out. They never get cleaned up. And over time, that's the reason why the tax code has become this gargantuan document.
Mike, do you think, I've heard a lot of, and I've read a lot of stuff about this, but I know that I remember when Ronald Reagan won and he dropped, the top tax bracket. I mean, he basically cut it in more than a half. And, if you have that kind of money, you have the means to cheat the system, as it were. Do you think that sort of tax bracket would ever come back? And is it even fair, or would like to see like a flat tax or even no income tax and have maybe a VAT, like what do you call that, like a consumer tax?
Value-added tax, maybe a national sales tax. All these things have been kind of proposed. I would favor a sales tax over an income tax. The problem with that from the government's point of view is you can refuse to pay the tax by refusing to buy the item. And as the economy tightens up and people aren't buying new iPhones, new TVs, new washing machines, then the government's revenues dry up. The current system is the revenue flows no matter what's going on with the American people. And but there is an ideal rate of taxation that gets the government the revenue they need, but leaves the general population still able to function efficiently as an economy. You can tax an economy into collapse. It's a lie to claim that you can tax an economy into prosperity. It's never happened. When Reagan did his massive tax cut, the economy lit up like a Christmas tree, and economic activity boomed, and the net result was the government was actually collecting more tax revenues than before the tax cut, because the stimulated economy was providing more opportunities for taxation. And the people had a larger share of the wealth that was coming in, and they were less resentful of the taxes coming on out because they were left enough to have a comfortable life. And unfortunately, under the decades of liberalism, where their attitude is that you shouldn't be allowed to have any money that's not under government control, we really have wound up in a situation where our economy is being taxed to a standstill. Because if you want a model of an economy, think of a pickup truck, and you've got an engine in there. That's the economy. And part of the energy from that engine is used to run the engine, overcome the friction of the wheels, and so forth and so on. And the rocks being thrown into the load bed of the truck, that's taxation. And let's say that your truck is going up a hill, and if you throw enough rocks in there, there won't be enough energy left over to run the engine, and the engine will stall. And that is pretty much where we are right now.
Wow, that's I've never heard of that one. That's a really good analogy. I'm going to steal that from you. I hope you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Help yourself.
Yeah. Also, there's some of these quote-unquote think tanks, and, they can say whatever they want, but they're kind of more or less agreeing on some kind of number of around $5 trillion more added to the national debt, in a 10-year term. I think in the United States they always talk in decades, when they do these sorts of things. And I'm curious as to, how much, how high can the United States debt go? I mean, in Canada we're at about 106% of GDP. Japan's are approaching 300. I mean, how much more of this central bank balance sheet nonsense can they go? How much farther can they go? I mean, this is insane.
Well, it is, and it depends on who you talk to, because obviously the people on Wall Street and the central bank are out there saying, it doesn't really matter how big the debt is. I mean, the interest payments are being made. What really matters is we're getting new money dropped all over us so we can play with the stock market. But again, it really is funny money. And when the Federal Reserve is cranking out all that new money to give to Wall Street, it is undermining the value of the money you have in your pocket that you already worked for and traded your labor for that money. And when the Federal Reserve is cranking out all this extra money for Wall Street to play with, it's like Voldemort waves his magic wand, and the value of the money in your pocket starts to disappear. And that is the real problem. And eventually we'll get to a point like they were in Zimbabwe. We're going to be walking around with paper notes that say $100 trillion, and it'll be worth about 27 cents in the real world. And they'll just keep it going until something breaks. They'll keep it going until it collapses. And the real issue here is that because of the way the U.S. economy is being run, this is the prime reason why so many other countries around the world are dropping the U.S. dollar and going with the ruble or the yuan or direct currency exchanges for their cross-border trade and banking. And the U.S. government is in a panic because forcing other countries to use the U.S. dollar for a small fee was the only thing holding our economy up. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline over the last 30 years. We can't even make a warplane that flies and fights decently. And we made a horrendous mistake with our GMO agriculture that nobody else on the planet wants to have. And yes, the U.S. government is arm twisting some countries to accept it, like India. Big mistake. Remember what happened with the BT cotton and how many Indian farmers committed suicide as a result of that. But major countries like China has banned GMO. Russia has banned GMO. Hungary banned GMO to the point where they literally went out and burned every field where GMO crops had been planted. Just burned it absolutely black to make sure that pollen was gone.
On a little brighter note, Mike, the United States, they still have people down there that are just, they are capitalists and they are great at what they do, and they do sell good products. I mean, I buy a lot of them on eBay, and once in a while I get dinged for duty and that, and it's well worth it because the products, there's no other place to turn to. It's too bad. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that things turn around for your country. I mean, obviously, I hope they do because we were just north of you, and kind of.
Well, your biggest problem right now is Hillary Clinton's wandering around your hinterland. Maybe you need to build a wall on your southern border. Okay?
Yeah, there's a lot of people coming over in Quebec right now. That's a big problem.
All right, well, listen, I'm going to let you...
I appreciate your time,
Yeah,
Mike.
I need to let you go. We're going to change phone calls to Arthur in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going
Mike,
fine.
I'm going to say I'm a long-time listener. I don't know, long time, 3 years. There's a couple things I was going to talk to you about. One of them is actually, I'm going to say the one for last, is somebody conflict the, where do you go with the Kennedy 11110 thing? How does that, is that real?
Yeah, that was real. Kennedy basically wanted to free the American people from the usury of the Federal Reserve. And he did it by creating a new currency under his authority as president, and every president does have that authority, to simply issue a new currency directly from the Treasury Department. And they based it on the silver that was in the Treasury Department, a lot of which had actually been recovered from some of the earlier machines to separate uranium for the atom bomb project. But the silver wasn't radioactive. They used it because it's a very efficient conductor of electricity, and they used it in these giant electromagnets. And
okay, you're kind of losing me. You're kind of losing me with all that. I don't want to interrupt you. I mean, I want to hear that. But I just want to get to there's just a couple of other things I want to tell you. Okay.
All right. Well, let me finish up with Executive Order 11110. Kennedy.
Go ahead.
Kennedy put $4 billion into circulation, and that's back when $1 billion was really a lot of money. And the American people were able to use this currency without accruing and having to pay interest to the Federal Reserve. And that, of course, was very angering to the owners of the Federal Reserve, who were just used to this idea that no American could conduct any business anywhere without the owners of the Federal Reserve getting a piece of the action. And I think it is very significant that following Kennedy's assassination, John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, wound up on the Warren Commission. Now, he may be a good little banker, but he was not qualified to be investigating a homicide. So his purpose on the Warren Commission most likely was to conceal that financial link between the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the Executive Order 11110.
Okay, thanks for that. I guess I'll just jump in and say that two people, and I've always accepted that. I've always, ever since I think the Money Masters may have been the first time I was familiarized with that. Are you familiar with that documentary?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's a pretty old documentary. Obviously, I may not have seen it when it first came out, but anyway, I'm not sure that that's actually in there, but I think that's where I first saw it. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you also that are you familiar with the Iranian building collapse?
Sorry, which building collapsed?
Well, there was a building in Iran that collapsed. I'm actually kind of going halfway into this. I got to come back and tell you that people are saying that the 1110 order is false, and they seem like respectable people within our alternative community, whatever that means. I'm not part of it. I mean, I'm just a listener. But
well, the Federal Reserve has a very strong motive to make that go away, because they are very concerned about being tangled up in questions about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And there are a lot of very respectable-looking people in the independent media who have been bought and paid for and compromised. They're trying to do to the independent media what they've done to the corporate media, and some are going along with it, and some of us are not.
Mike, let me just throw this out to you. You know AE 9/11 Truth,
yes.
Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They have, and I wish I had sites for you. I'm going to send you this stuff in emails. They're talking about a building that collapsed in Iran, and you can see in the videos that it is another controlled demolition. It's like the tallest building in Iran or something. You know, it's almost like the trade centers for the U.S.
Okay, we're gonna have to let you go. I'm sorry, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call.
Can I hang over? Can I hang over? I wanted to tell you something.
Okay, stay on the line. We're going to come back, but you're going to have to make it short. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still talking with Arthur in Massachusetts. You had one more point you were going to make.
Very simply, the two people that are in conflict with the 1110 is Corbett Report, and who wrote the Creature from Jekyll Island?
I'm blanking on the name, but I know who.
Anyway, we know who it is. The guy with the beard. He's been on some Alex Jones movies and stuff. I mean, both of these guys. Is it Jim Corbett? I don't even know his first name, but I find these people very highly respectable in all their other endeavors, and all of a sudden they're on a show together. I forget. I guess he must be on Corbett's show being interviewed. Corbett Report.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I'll look into it and first of all verify that is Corbett his opinion. Yeah. But you know, all of us can make mistakes. All of us can be tricked by those who are trying to poison the well here. But the fact of the matter is that I have physical specimens of those Kennedy notes, the United States notes. So it's not a fiction. Those notes really did exist.
It's not fiction. It's that well, you listen to this thing. I wish I could. I'll try to send you the link for it. They're not saying that it didn't exist.
Okay. Well, then I don't.
Saying that it didn't do anything. It didn't really change anything, and it's all it's been blown out of proportion. Also, just
no. Also, we're running out of time, and I've really given you a lot of time. Let's switch.
I'll send you both. Thank you so much.
We'll switch over to Miles in Maine. Miles, thank you for waiting so patiently. What is on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing? I was just thinking about what you said about the taxes, and related to the economy and jobs. But how are you going to keep this? My opinion is, how are you going to keep this tax flowing with no jobs? How are you going to keep these taxes at any type of level?
Well, you're absolutely right. With all this unemployment, I mean, I just saw another article about how the Internal Revenue Service is claiming record tax revenues have been collected so far this year. My response is, from who? The refugees aren't paying taxes. The illegal immigrants aren't really paying all that much in taxes. And it may be another case of where they're just making this stuff up out of thin air, like the unemployment numbers. And I'm sure that the U.S. government has to claim that they're getting record tax revenues. I mean, it wasn't enough to cover the spending. There was still a deficit. But they need to reassure all of the creditors that the U.S. can continue to at least make the interest payments on the debt. So, again, you're absolutely right. With our economy shutting down, it would make sense that tax revenues would have to be in decline.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. If Trump doesn't hold true on his promise and go after these jobs and get them back here, stop bringing in these imports and do the things he said he was going to do, we're just simply going to be in a terrible world of trouble. There's
We're
no other way you
already
can't
in a
get blood out of
terrible
the
world
rock.
of trouble. We're already in that terrible world of trouble. But, like the frog being boiled slowly, we didn't really notice it until we peek our little head up out of the water and say, wow, what a mess we're in. Anyway, thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. When we come on back from station identification, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us. Aloha, America. Welcome to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to sit in with us in hour number 3 on a Friday with her unique perspective on the world. Welcome to the show, and what's the first thing you want to talk about?
The first thing I'd like to talk about, which has me more than a little annoyed, apparently the U.S. military's leaders have agreed on a strategy to guarantee the U.S. military retains its global dominance through the 21st century. Connect everything with everything. As Defense One describes it, the result? An unimaginably large cephaloidal nervous system armed with the world's most advanced weaponry and in control of all of the U.S.'s military equipment, belonging to the world's most powerful army.
They're building Skynet.
Exactly. Oh, insert ominous chord here. Yeah, right.
Okay.
It will be a networked military, an extreme take on the Internet of Things, which would connect everything from F-35 jets, God help them, to the Navy's destroyers, to the army of the tanks crawling all over the land, to devices to be carried by soldiers. Every weapon would be connected, every weapon, vehicle, and device connected, sharing data, constantly aware of the presence and state of every other node in a truly global network. Of course, the development of these smart weapons should unnerve Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who has repeatedly warned that AI and machine learning poses a greater threat to the future of the U.S. than does North Korea. And if not properly regulated, Elon suggests that machines could turn against their human masters.
Oh, well, they certainly could here.
Yep.
But I have 2 problems with this.
Yeah.
Okay. And this gets back to the poor quality of work we see in the military-industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Aegis ships, ever since they were created, they network.
Mm-hmm.
And software error in the network system is what led the USS Vincente to shoot down that Iranian passenger jet. Huge embarrassment for the United States.
Yes.
And then, of course, they started to enlarge this networking to other platforms in what was called the Aegis CEC, the Cooperative Engagement Capability. And they were testing it off the coast of Long Island, and this system was linking together the Aegis ships, aircraft in the air, missile systems, and even submarines that were being communicated with laser beams. And the result on that was they shot down a 747 TWA 800. So now they're going to take these systems that have a track record of unreliability and just make them truly global.
Yeah.
And again, I don't have a high degree of confidence. When you look at how badly they've botched up the software just on the F-35 itself.
Oh, that was painful, Mike.
Yeah.
Painful.
And a big part of the problem is that software development has become very, shall we say, bastardized here in the United States. Gone are the days where you would have a small group of people or an individual write a piece of code. And it's now broken out. There are teams that are working on things. You're getting code from several different companies you're trying to glue together. I remember when Wavefront was buying other people's systems to weld together into Maya, and those early releases of the system were really terrible.
Yeah.
The current Maya is great. But again, we understand, just looking at all the goofs we've seen in iOS 11 on the iPhone and iPad, the state of the art of software development in this country is very poor. And when you're going to take this software and link it up with nuclear missile launchers, yeah, there's a concern there.
Well, what I was wondering in reading this article is, What happens when one of the pieces of network code in this 21st century Rube Goldberg contraption starts making autonomous decisions about how evil humankind has become and decides to cure the problem? Gee, what could go wrong except for everything?
Well, that's certainly a possibility, but the real danger is that there's simply going to be a software goof that presents perfectly banal situations as a real threat. And again, getting on back to the USS Vincennes, the problem was that the Aegis tracking system, because of a software bug, assigned the exact same target ID to two different aircraft. The Airbus that was approaching the airport to land, and a much more distant Iranian F-14 that was conducting a training exercise over a military base. And the computer merged them and thought it was seeing an F-14 near the ship in attack mode and destroyed the Airbus. So, it's the stuff of science fiction that Skynet wakes up and says, well, we're really much better off without all you icky-poo human beings.
Yeah.
But the real problem is software errors. And in the current state of software, it is so complex and so hard to find. It makes debugging it very, very difficult.
Right.
I remember when I was first looking at object-oriented programming, and it's clearly set up to enable software to be developed by these very large corporatized teams, but at the same time, it makes debugging the code insanely difficult to do. And we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining our network. And what is the next story you want to talk about?
Apparently, and this is something we need to keep our eyes on Sunday, which is 1 October. It's the date of the Catalonian referendum about staying with or leaving Spain. Catalonian bonds collapse as police warn of chaos if referendum is canceled. And while the Catalonian people decide whether to break with Spain, the bond market appears to have already made up its mind, as Catalonia bonds are decoupling from Spanish sovereign yields. And Catalonia bonds expiring next year have seen spikes over 2%, the highest in over a year, and more than 230 base points higher than the equivalent Spanish sovereign bond yields.
Well, Catalonia is the economic engine of all of Spain, and that's why Madrid is desperate to not let them break free. Same reason that the Union didn't want the Confederacy to break away, because that was the economic powerhouse.
Yeah, that was the breadbasket.
From all the cotton sales and everything that was down there.
And I really would like to hope that Prime Minister Rajoy understands how lousy the optics here look in terms of the Spanish attempts to quash this referendum. And should Spain actually do this on Sunday, it should simply resign from the UN. And the reason I'm saying this, Mike, is the charter of the UN, and I'd like to remind the Spanish politicians, enshrines the concept of peaceful self-determination, which is what the Catalonians are trying to do.
And remember, this right to self-determination used to be part of America's foreign policy until it got in the way of empire building. Now, a couple of points that are coming on out. Apparently, the police in Catalonia are siding with the people and away from Madrid. Madrid was going to use the police to try and block access to the polling places on Sunday. The Catalonia police are saying, we will not comply with that. Madrid is apparently trying to send in police from Andalusia to do the job. This could lead to some rioting and conflict in the streets. Meanwhile, the United Nations is saying that the steps Madrid is taking to stop this referendum do amount to human rights violations. So
absolutely.
This is going to get ugly.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Spain has had a history of civil wars before, and I am hoping that calmer heads are going to prevail this time and prevent that from happening. Back here in the OUSSA, the Occupied, Unhinged, Surveilled States of America, Podesta emails have shown Facebook colluded with Clinton, Assange reminds us. Now, beginning on October 7th of last year, WikiLeaks published hundreds of emails from the private account of Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. The daily drops continued for a couple of days after the November 8th election. On Thursday, as the U.S. media were still speculating about Russian meddling on Twitter, Facebook and Reddit. Julian Assange tweeted some of the Podesta emails with a reminder that the social network's leading lights were Clinton's fans.
Yes.
Okay? Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and founder of Facebook, sent a personal email to Podesta in August of 2015 saying he enjoyed spending time with him and that their conversations had given him, quote, a lot to think about. Zuckerberg then thanked Podesta for sharing his experiences with the Center for American Progress, CAP, a Democratic think tank which was founded by Podesta. Included in the thread was an email to Podesta from Elliot Schrange, the vice president of communications at Facebook, who said Zuckerberg was looking for a way to direct his wealth to have an impact as great as Facebook, adding that Podesta's ideas had really moved his thinking. Zuckerberg then asked Podesta if he could reach out in the future to hear his ideas and said he was looking forward to continuing their conversation. I hope it's okay if I reach out as my thinking develops to get your ideas and reactions, Zuckerberg said. If there are any other folks you think I should talk to, please let me know. Now, some Twitter users were very quick to point out the hypocrisy behind Democrats spending so much time and energy investigating all the major social media sites, desperately searching for any possible collusion between President Trump and Russia, even though Facebook colluded with Clinton. Michael, this is nothing less than absolutely flipping amazing.
Well, you know, there's a list of entities that it's okay to interfere with our politics, like Zuckerberg, Facebook, and Israel.
Yes.
And then there's the other list, entities that shouldn't be messing around with our elections.
Yes.
Like conservatives in general.
Yes, definitely. And last Friday was a very interesting day for DHS. They dropped an alleged bombshell statement that sent a thrill up the leg, to quote Chris Matthews, of every CNN reporter across the country. The news from DHS implied that the election systems of 21 states around the country had been hacked, or at least were close to being hacked, which set off a new wave of alleged Russian collusion speculation in the U.S. News media see DHS notifies 21 states of hacker targeting. Election officials blame Russian government cyber actors. That said, according to California Secretary of State Alex Padilla, who released a statement this morning in response to the DHS, the whole thing was just a bunch of fake news. Padilla noted that after requesting additional information from DHS on the hacks, it quickly became clear that their conclusions were just flat out wrong, and that California's elections infrastructure and websites were not hacked or breached by Russian cyber actors. And he made this statement. Last Friday, my office was notified by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security that Russian cyber actors scanned California's internet-facing systems in 2016, including Secretary of State websites. Following our request for further information, it became clear that DHS conclusion was clearly wrong. California says Russians did not hack their voting systems.
Well, even DHS is now saying that they don't really know who was doing this. Remember, Department of Homeland Security themselves were caught trying to break into voter databases in something like 5 states. But they're already out there telling Wisconsin, no, we don't know who did it. It wasn't the Russians. They're already pulling back from that story.
So I would calmly and logically suggest that the DHS, otherwise known as the Department of Hysterical Security, collectively close its mouth until it has something which actually may prove to be certifiably true.
We don't need proof. We're the U.S. government. You just believe what we say.
Not
You're
anymore.
a loyal American.
Not anymore.
Then you must be working for the Russians.
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Apparently, there is a little tiny uptick in the Q2 GDP, up 3.1% versus 3% rise expected.
Ooh, big change
It's not huge, but it's a small signal that perhaps some things may be getting a little bit better. Just a little bit. I'm not saying great, but it's a slight improvement. My sense is, though, that people are still concerned about spending money they don't have, i.e. using Christmas credit cards for Christmas buying. It may well be another anemic Christmas shopping season this year with heavy discounts on after-Christmas shopping, which still may not bring the buyers into the stores, Mike.
Well, in past Christmas seasons, we've seen the same thing happen. We get into the autumn, and the government and the corporate media start saying, oh, the economy's really picking up.
Nope.
Things are good. You should be confident. Get ready to go on out and shop till you drop because the economy is doing very well. And then, of course, once we're into January, and they come on back and said, well, we're going to have to revise those earlier figures
downward.
Lower. Really downward.
Yes.
Really a lot lower. In fact, get a drill. We're going to have to go underground for these.
Oh, boy. The next significant story, I think, is that China is kicking out all North Korean businesses. They ordered all North Korean firms in the country to shut down within the next couple of months. And this was announced yesterday by the Chinese Minister of Commerce. And they had to close down within 120 days of the most recent UN sanctions resolution. According to multiple reports, China has long been North Korea's primary beneficiary for decades, helping the regime skirt sanctions by exploiting the livelihood clause in past resolutions. But since President Trump took office, the U.S. has increased pressure on China to rein in its nuclear neighbor. And I don't know. I don't know what this is going to do.
Well, this is China placating the United States.
And they're bending over backwards, and they're losing
face. It's appeasement. Yeah, that's a big factor.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's really appreciated over there in Foggy Bottom.
Nope.
Is that you're not going to get China to back down or appease too many times because of that issue of face.
Right.
But that's essentially what China is trying to do, is appease the United States of America. And as Neville Chamberlain can tell you, that is only going to make your opposition that much more aggressive.
Yeah. And it's possible that any planned strike against North Korea may wait until this period is over. But I would sort of think against that, Mike, because keeping resources waiting, poised to strike but holding, is both emotionally very difficult for military professionals and very costly.
Well, it's not like it's their kids or their money.
Yeah. And what the U.S. has been promising is to beef up resources in the region, but not directly on the Korean peninsula, and that would be Japan or Guam. Now, Kim likes to pair his rocket launches with national holidays, and the next North Korean holiday falls on 10 October, Party Foundation Day. That's a week from Monday. I would suggest that if the world is going to see anything more about tests, it's probably going to happen right around that time. Also, I'd like to talk about a current movement in the Xinjiang province of China. The Chinese police have now ordered Muslims to hand in all copies of Qurans and prayer mats or face harsh punishment. Ethnic minority neighborhoods will face this if they are found with any of these items on them or around them. And China has revised its regulation on religious affairs in a bid to reduce extremism.
Well, unfortunately, over in the western part of China, the Muslims have been causing a great deal of grief. It's not being given a lot of coverage because in Europe and the United States, they're still trying to sell the idea that we should let the Muslims in without any kind of vetting whatsoever. Remember that German politician said, oh, Germany would be so boring without the Muslims.
But there are other issues here and that are very hard felt by the ethnic Uyghur who live there. They have noticed very carefully that their native language is no longer being taught in the schools. It's all Chinese. And Han Chinese are being imported into this area, and they always get the better jobs. They always get the better training. And, you know, this is a problem. You have to treat people at some point with respect. Otherwise, Mike, there's going to be a breaking point. And I would almost seriously doubt that any Chinese officials who ordered this crackdown have ever seen the movie V for Vendetta. But I am concerned that this attempted crackdown may have just the polar opposite effect from what they want to see happen in Xinjiang. And although the Chinese police and military can probably put down any rebellion with brute force, what the world is going to see here is going to look very, very bad for the Chinese government.
Well, they're probably going to be able to control the optics like they did Tiananmen Square, where, people who lived right around it in China
didn't know
what was going on here.
Yeah, but communications since Tiananmen Square have become much more sophisticated. So
All right.
We'll see.
All right. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, finishing up on China and Claire's comments about certain types of Chinese are getting preferential treatment. The reality is that China has a strong sense of racial identity, and they do look down on other ethnic groups who are collectively called Guai, which means demon. But you also need to remember how China was formed by the Emperor Qin Huangdi, because it was originally several different Asian kingdoms that were all brought together. They were all forced to use the same language, the same monetary system, but they still cling to their original ancestral roots, the Sichuan, the Mandarin, and so forth and so on. And there's a little bit of friction and hostility even between those groups, and they're always vying for the superior political power. Now, before we go back to Claire here, very troubling story that was just on Fox News. The U.S. is now pulling all of their diplomats out of Cuba, supposedly over these strange acoustic attacks, and the State Department has now issued a travel ban for Americans going to Cuba. They're saying everybody gets out of Cuba, and that's very alarming.
That's what you do when you're about to do some sort of covert or overt invasion, right?
Exactly. And we know that the U.S., certainly the CIA, is feeling unfulfilled because their invasion at the Bay of Pigs didn't go quite the way they wanted it to. Actually, the CIA's list of failures is actually very, very impressive. The question is, how are they going to start this? How are they going to justify this? And you might want to do a web search for something called Operation Northwoods. This was a real plan hatched by the intelligence agencies, and it went up very high in the chain of command before somebody vetoed it. But the plan was to fake airline hijackings, to blame on Cuba, and to cause crashes and loss of life, all to be blamed on Cuba to justify a new invasion. And it looks like that's where they're going right now. They want all the Americans out of there. That's a red flag indicating possible military action, coup d'etat, overthrow of the government. And again, this refusal to normalize relations with Cuba is a huge strategic mistake. When Castro kicked Batista out, his first move was to contact the U.S. government and say, I want to be friends with you. Let's normalize relations. You guys want to buy our fruit and our sugar. Yeah. We want to sell it to you. Just not at that discounted rate that Batista was doing. And the U.S. government said, no, you will run your country for the benefit of our corporations, and they declared the embargo. Which, by the way, following the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy had to violate that embargo by trading plane loads of medicine and food to get back the Cuban brigade.
And this is so insane to me because, Mike, we are trading with Vietnam with which we were at war, for heaven's sakes.
We are, but you see, it was that embargo that drove Cuba to a relationship with the Soviet Union, which in turn led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was brought about, that was the Soviet Union's response to the attempted invasion of Cuba by the United States at the Bay of Pigs.
Now, Mike, I'm just speculating, just sort of blue sky here. Do you think that this potential operation, and we don't know if it's going to go or not, is to prevent Russia from getting another large
That appears to be it. Apparently
chokehold?
Somebody has decided that rather than be friends with Cuba to keep Russia out, we'll just take over Cuba and keep Russia out. And again, this this concocted story about audio attacks on our diplomats, which nobody can prove, and Cuba is certainly denying it, and Cuba had no reason to attack our diplomats. They want normalized relations with the United States. Something big is about to happen in Cuba, and there's going to have to be some kind of a false flag where the U.S. says, oh, those dastardly Cubans, they have invaded South Florida, or some such nonsense.
Well, what do you think they can come up with that they really think the American public is going to believe?
Again, do a web search for something called Operation Northwoods.
Okay.
We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what is your next story?
Well, apparently, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, has declared the Iran deal empty and blames Russia. So with President...
I think my gout attack here is definitely the fault of Vladimir Putin.
Yes. And also the socks we can't find in our dryer.
That's true. He stole them all.
He's completely responsible for that.
That's true.
And with President Trump expected to try to come up with some excuse to weasel out of the P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran, Ambassador Nikki Haley has been backing his efforts by vilifying the deal. Most recently, that centered on inspections. Under the P5+1 deal, the IAEA conducts a massive number of inspections on Iran's nuclear sites regularly. Haley, however, has been pressing them to conduct inspections against sites with absolutely no links to the civilian nuclear program, specifically military facilities. The P5+1 agreement includes clauses permitting such inspections if there was evidence of nuclear activity at such sites. The ones that Haley's pushing for, however, were sites that IAEA admitted questions about were resolved years ago. Haley is accusing Russia of blocking these new inspections and claiming that the nuclear deal is empty without them. Oh, Mike, I'm having a double Picard facepalm moment in looking at this. The degree to which this woman continues to embrace the role of village idiot at the UN apparently knows no bounds. Both Haley and Trump need to understand that they have an infinitely more sophisticated America than they did in the aftermath of 9/11, who are not particularly looking for the government to save them. The alleged responsibility by Russia for the perceived failure of the P5+1 is nothing more than complete gas passed in public on Haley's part to create a link of demonization between Russia, Iran, and North Korea. The only problem for her is that such linkage is making her, and unfortunately President Trump, kind of look like the nether end of a couple of donkeys. But the timing of this claim is very ominous because, as reported at the Times of Israel, 31 August, since U.S. President Donald Trump certified that Iran was honoring the nuclear deal in July, he has sent strong signals that he does not plan to do the same again come October, leaving experts unsure of his endgame and warning that such a move could mushroom into the disintegration of the entire pact, even if Tehran is holding up its end of the deal. I think they'll be non-compliant, Trump told the Wall Street Journal earlier that month in August. I do not expect that they will be in compliance. So what is he going to do or plant or declare to give him the coverage he wants in stating that Iran is not in compliance next month? And we have another troubling article also featured in antiwar.com. I commend this blog to you highly. They're very serious. They're very careful. They're very disciplined. And the article states that hardliners are lining up beside Bolton plan to leave the P5+1. Now, how in the name of heaven they believe that they are going to be able to convince the other signatories to walk away from this deal is nothing short of speculative madness. But what you have to understand is that the crux of this issue is regime change in Damascus, as demanded by Israel, is expected to be largely bought at the cost of American blood and American
money.
money.
Regime change in Tehran.
Yes, in Tehran. Well, Damascus too. I'm sorry.
Okay, now here's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
The other members of the P5+1 are very much on board with this deal of keeping it. And the problem here is that if the U.S. pulls on out, Iran is going to pull out.
Yeah.
And so these other nations will not really have much to say about it. Because if the U.S. pulls out of the deal and Iran stays in, then Iran goes on not having a nuclear deterrent. allowing inspections, just sitting there and waiting for the U.S. to come and invade or throw more sanctions on them. And again, this is really a foreign policy disaster for the United States,
yes,
because it's sending a message. First of all, the P5+1 made a deal, was set down, everybody agreed to it and signed it. Now the U.S. government is out there saying, well, in addition to this, we also meant to include these missile sites and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of deal creep.
Yeah.
You know, like we meant to have this in there, and now's the time to put it on in. And if the U.S. pulls out of the deal, same message goes on out. The U.S. does not keep their promises.
And cannot be trusted.
You cannot trust the U.S. government. And North Korea is watching this very, very closely because the U.S. is trying to convince Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear deterrent for a promise that they'll be left alone. And yet they made exactly the same deal with Libya. Libya gave up their nuclear weapons development, and the U.S. went on in and smashed up their country. They made the same deal with Syria. Assad gave up his chemical weapons, and the U.S. is still in there trying to find some way to kick him out. Same thing with Iraq. Saddam Hussein gave up his chemical weapons, and the U.S. invaded anyway. And we're seeing it again, fourth time, with Iran, where the U.S. is going back on this agreement because they're still pursuing an agenda of regime change, invasion, and conquest. And North Korea is watching this, and so is every other country on the face of planet Earth. Nobody is going to make an agreement with the United States government. It will be half a century before anybody trusts the U.S. government. Again, that's assuming the U.S. government doesn't implode first somewhere in the next several months.
You know, the credibility of this country with all these actions, Mike, has become absolutely well and truly flushed. I mean, it just has. We have no credibility in the world anymore, except for selling the weapons, which, you know, they love to do.
Well, the U.S. is going around to these other countries like the mafia. We're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. You know, you're going to give us the weapons, and, you know, we promise we won't invade, but if you don't give us the weapons, we're going to invade anyway. And so these countries disarm, and they get attacked. And that's just the reality. That's a repeating, consistent pattern, and everybody knows it.
We had sort of a slightly positive thing come up in Congress where lawmakers demand U.S. withdrawal from Saudi-led war in Yemen. And there is a bipartisan bill proposing halting military assistance to the air war in Yemen unless Congress votes and defines the U.S. role. The bill requires the removal of U.S. forces from the war in Yemen unless and until Congress votes to authorize the American assistance. For more than 2 years, the United States military has provided aerial refueling tankers and the intelligence to Saudi-led coalition waging a war against Houthi rebels, backed a little bit by Iran, but there's not a whole lot of hard evidence that I've seen on that. And although the bipartisan bill is unlikely to secure a majority in the House, it does underscore growing concerns over Saudi Arabia's handling of the war that is now at a stalemate on the battlefield. And it reflects growing unease at Congress over the U.S. role there, following previous attempts by lawmakers this year to rein in arms sales or other military assistance to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and their Gulf partners backing the Yemeni government. Both Republicans and Democrats have accused the Gulf Coalition of delaying or blocking the delivery of humanitarian aid to Yemen and characterized the Saudi-led states for bombing raids that have hit schools, hospitals, killed, and wounded large numbers of civilians. As a result of this war, more than 7 million people are on the verge of starvation. And now the country has had an unprecedented cholera outbreak that has spread at an alarming rate in over 7 months. You know, I have to wonder, Mike, just what it must be like for these congressional representatives supporting this bill with the sure and certain knowledge that the U.S. military is abetting Saudi war crimes in Yemen. I mean, that's it, pure and simple.
Well, it's a little deeper than that. Saudi Arabia is acting as a U.S. proxy in Yemen. Because the U.S. intervened in Yemen several years ago, replaced the government. The people of Yemen didn't like their new puppet rulers, and they kicked them out and set up a new domestic government. and the U.S. sent Saudi Arabia in there to slap Yemen down and say, once you are conquered by the American empire, you will stay conquered.
Yeah.
How dare you even think about breaking away? And it has gone very badly. It's made Saudi Arabia look bad. By extension, it's making the United States look bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think the concern of Congress isn't what's going on in Yemen. It is a concern that they want to reassert their authority to declare war as defined in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Because more and more Americans are saying all of these wars are illegal.
Yes, they are.
Because they have not been declared by Congress, and only Congress can declare a war.
Right.
Basically, all the presidents have been using George Bush's original congressional authorization for the use of force dating back to 2003.
Yeah, the FOIA, right?
Yeah, and basically they're saying that's ridiculous. You're not supposed to give an open-ended carte blanche to the president to simply send our kids and our money out to just kill anybody he feels like. You know, war is a serious business, and it should be decided by Congress. And I think this bill is an attempt to try and start prying back that authority.
Yeah.
But again, there's a lot of these members of Congress are heavily invested in the military-industrial complex, and as this article says, it's not likely to get a voting majority in the House.
Right, right. We also have news from Global Research, a Canadian blog that is very, very sober. And apparently, a breaking story today was that the U.S. coalition is using illegal chemical weapons in Deir ez-Zor. Syria has confirmed that the U.S.-led coalition, whose very presence in Syria is illegal according to international law, has recently dropped white phosphorus munitions over a village in Deir ez-Zor. Similar to the infamous napalm munitions that the U.S. used in the war in Vietnam, white phosphorus melts the skin off human bones, resulting in an excruciatingly torturous death.
Okay, it's pronounced napalm.
Okay.
And actually, white phosphorus is a lot worse than napalm. Napalm is jellied gasoline. The white phosphorus, you can't put it out once it's burning.
Yeah.
You throw water on it, it just burns that much hotter.
Yeah.
And it is illegal under international law. The only purpose for white phosphorus is to generate smoke, which it's very good at doing, as a smoke screen. And the smoke itself is mildly toxic, but not all that dangerous. But it is a violation of international law to deploy white phosphorus against civilian residential areas. Israel does it all the time over Gaza, and now the U.S. has been caught doing it again in Syria. Even as they scream, oh, Assad is gassing his own people, Assad is using these horrible chemical weapons, and it turns out, you know, the U.S. government is projecting again.
Yeah. And the news comes a day after a report that coalition airstrikes left 9 civilians dead in the northeastern province of Hasaka. Those killed included an Iraqi family of 6 that had escaped Daesh violence in Mosul, according to Sana. Citing sources, the agency added that the coalition had also launched airstrikes on the villages Haddaj, Hunedis, and Hassan Ali near the Iraqi border, which resulted in a huge amount of material damage. This is as serious as a heart attack. And what I'm having a hard time wrapping my hand around, you know, all of the people, the unholy triumvirate of president whisperers around President Trump, McMaster, Kelly, or Mattis, it seems that the U.S. military is committing war crimes by using these weapons and thinking, in their minds, the end justifies the means, right?
Well, they're presuming that they're going to be on the victorious side, and nobody on the winner's side gets tried for war crimes. But remember, all the way back, before the invasion of Iraq, there was this situation where the U.S. State Department was going to all these other countries around the earth and signing treaties saying that no U.S. official or military personnel could be arrested within their territory in connection with war crimes.
Immunity.
Blanket immunity around the globe. And when they started doing that, I actually wrote, they're getting ready to commit war crimes.
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't be needing this indemnification.
Yeah. It's really rough. And in the coming week or weeks, look for more of a connection between Iran, Russia, and North Korea. That somehow North Korea, which has terrible staging problems, is actually helping Iran with its military and ballistic missile program. I think that would probably be the other way around if it actually existed, and I don't think it does. But in the news, the corporate news from the prostitutes, I think we will see more and more of this coming up to a drumbeat of perhaps hitting them all. What do you think?
It could be, but again, they're demonizing things other countries are doing that are only a mirror of what our country does.
Yeah.
Look at how much technology transfer there is from the U.S. military-industrial complex to Israel.
Oh, yeah.
Israel will get all these goodies from the United States. They'll reverse engineer them, make copies, and sell them to other countries, not all of whom are friends with the United States.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a racket and a scam. All right, let's talk about this one here.
All right. Apparently, Antifa is planning a civil war to overthrow the U.S. government. And apparently on November 4th, you may want to put that into your outlook, stay away from large crowded areas. Antifa is planning a new round of nationwide riots. And that's the word. It wasn't demonstration, peaceful, non-resistant. The word is riots, as part of a plan to start a civil war that will lead to the overthrow of the Trump administration.
Gee, I wonder who they're working for.
Yeah, right. Hello. Far-left militants plan to gather in the streets and public squares of cities and towns across this country in the hope of building momentum for civil unrest that leads to nothing short than domestic regime change. Our protest must grow loud day after day and night after night. Thousands becoming hundreds of thousands, and then millions, determined to act to put an end to the grave danger that the Trump-Pence regime poses to the world by demanding that this whole regime be removed from power, stated a call to action from the Refuse Fascism website. A longer screed posted on the Revolutionary Communist website makes it clear that Antifa is not prepared to wait for election change from Democrats and will engage in ferocious struggle based on plans outlined in a book written by Bob Avakian, the chairman of the Revolutionary Communist Party, which is called The Coming Civil War. Now, Mike, my translation for this is Antifa is planning to create a situation under which the Trump administration will have almost no alternative to creating a state of national martial law, suspending the Constitution and Bill of Rights. At that point, the warmongering corporations and banks will simply be able to declare war against any country they see fit to demolish with no congressional oversight and no public discussion.
All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about this plan by Antifa to have nationwide riots on November 4th to drive the Trump administration from office. And I note they stopped short of saying who they plan to replace him with. And we noticed that Hillary Clinton has announced that she's going back into politics, and she promises she's never going to run for president again.
Oh, that's scary.
That seems to indicate that she would be open to being anointed.
Yes.
Or crowned president of the United States.
Yep.
Remember, they tried all of this when Hillary lost the election. They had all the riots all over there, and it went nowhere. I don't think Antifa can get hundreds of thousands of millions of people. Even George Soros doesn't have that much money to pay all these people to go on out and riot.
Yep.
But I want to make something very, very clear here. I, like many Americans, I'm very disappointed in President Donald Trump, in particular his war policy.
Yep.
Okay? But he is the President of the United States of America. He played the campaign by the rules everybody agreed to, and he won. And he overcame massive election fraud to do it. And so anybody who thinks they're going to come on in and with violence take down the president, well, they're going to find an enemy in me. Not because I'm a big fan of Donald Trump, but because I believe in the American system and that it's still worth protecting and defending.
Amen to that. I'm with you, dear.
Okay, well, you can load and I'll shoot.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Like I'm in the condition to actually go on out there and do anything. But
no.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Those people who are out there who are booing the NFL for disrespecting our flag, you need to stand up and say, right or wrong, good or bad, The president is the president, and anybody who's going to try and remove him by force is clearly an enemy of the people, an enemy of the nation, a clear and present danger.
I agree.
And like I said, I find it significant that all of these Antifa people are talking about driving out the Trump administration, and they won't say who they plan on putting in place of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And like I said, I got a good idea who that's going to be.
Yeah. And, if they start calling out the National Guard on these riots, which I think they may if they get intense enough, we don't know yet. But I have a feeling that a little bit of a close encounter with a couple of National Guard or regular military is probably going to change Antifa's tactics just a little bit, because it will be brutal. I mean, they will be put down with extreme prejudice, Mike.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because Donald Trump is going to realize this is an assault on his office.
Yes.
And frankly, Putin had the right idea. American Antifa went into Moscow and started violent rioting, attacking Russian people just for being Russian people, screaming that you're the reason we've got Donald Trump as president.
How stupid.
And Putin threw them all in prison, and I hope he keeps them there for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Okay, because Antifa is a terrorist group.
Yes.
And I will not surrender this country, with all of its faults, to a terrorist group.
No.
Absolutely.
It's going to be interesting to see how those move forward. Do we have a little bit of time left?
We're almost to the end of the music here.
All right.
And I know you had, there's
more,
the music right there.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to sign off here now. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of stuff to share with you. We'll be back Monday here on Republic Broadcasting. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Have a really good weekend. We'll see you Monday. Aloha, America.